Welcome and thanks for joining us today. We've been really looking forward to hosting this IT strategy webinar for you, so thanks for coming on board today. We have the chat open here on the webinar, so if you have any questions, do send them over. We'll aim to get those answered during the session or come back to you directly via email. If you have any particular inquiries, do feel free to send them over to hello@claireLOGIC.net and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Over the past few weeks, we've caught up with Andy Tristan, co-founder here at claireLOGIC, to collect the top 8 questions we should be asking ourselves when we're planning our IT strategy. For our clients, we provide a virtual CIO via strategic, proactive, managed IT solutions.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of the next half hour or so is to go through a few questions you might want to ask yourself. The first one, how are you using technology to make your team and your customers feel valued? It's quite a simple question. Do your team have the tools to do the job effectively? And where your customers interact with your business via some sort of technology, is it a smooth and hassle-free experience? How does it make them feel? Lots of people are getting more and more interested in their own security. For example, if they're interacting with you and they need to log in somewhere, do they have multi-factor authentication? That small interaction can say a lot about your business. How do your clients feel, for example, if you've got them on the phone and you keep asking them to repeat information that they've already given you, or you can't answer their questions quickly because the systems that you're using can't get the data you need quickly? How do your clients feel if you've got them on the phone and you tell them that your systems are running slowly, or you can't get them the information that you need straight away? What equipment do you provide your team? Do they have a nice laptop and a reliable phone system and a nice slick multi-factor authentication system? Or do they spend half their day logging into websites, typing in numbers, having poor quality phone calls and waiting for their computer? Do you buy the cheapest computer you can find for them? If you are, what message are you sending about how much you value their time? Think about how you feel when you're waiting for your computer to start up, or watching the screen freeze multiple times a day as you're trying to open documents or edit pages. It's an interesting stat that just 1 minute of lost time per day over the 4 to 5 year life of a laptop is 15 to 20 hours of wasted time. What's your time really worth? Is it really worth saving a few £100s on a laptop? In reality, that slow laptop probably won't even last 4 to 5 years before needing replacement. And it's not just the cost of a new laptop, it's the disruption of having to change, set everything else up again, all that kind of thing. And it's likely more than 1 minute. 10 minutes lost a day could be 200 hours of wasted time. And actually what's saving those few £100s on a cheap laptop actually cost you when you're looking at the bigger picture. Question 2. Should you keep your systems on premises or not on premises, i.e. put them in the cloud? Cloud solutions are obviously growing in popularity and there are a lot of benefits to them. It's scalable, you don't have to buy any kit, often quick to set up, and can be a lot more secure than looking after your own infrastructure. But there's still a place for on-premise or hosted infrastructure. You tend to have more control. You're not necessarily at the mercy of changes that you don't like. In some cases, it can be the cheaper solution to buy something and just keep it running. There's often a higher management overhead. You need to do the patching yourself. You need to keep all the security up to date and all that kind of thing. So really, for each application, you need to look at what's available in the cloud, what's available locally, and make a decision based on the specific criteria you need. There are different flavors of cloud hosted as well. You might be using a cloud infrastructure provider to provide your own solutions, install your own servers in the cloud and run them and manage them yourself instead of using your own hardware. Or you might be going to a third-party provider that have their own software also running in the cloud. But if they are doing that, are you sure that they have got a good backup regime? Are you sure that if you delete something that you're going to get the data back? Or do they just have backups of their complete systems for their own benefit? Using the cloud for backup and disaster recovery can put you in a really strong position, but in some situations you may lose control of the backup side of things and not have visibility of it, and are you sure it's working? These are some of the questions you have to think about when you're picking a third-party provider. Having your own infrastructure can give you more control, but on the other hand, they can be more limiting. If you're running servers in your own office, what do you do if there's a power cut? Have you got the same level of backup and internet connectivity and power backups and things that you might have from a hosted data center? And these are all the questions you need to look at. It's not often a straightforward decision. Sometimes if you've got large amounts of data that you're working with, you'd want to keep it on site for quick access. But then you'd need some sort of cloud solution, perhaps, to make sure you've got a backup. So you're protected if there's a flood, a fire, or a power cut, and you can then carry on working in a different way, but still access your data. Sometimes the solution you want may not be available either in the cloud or on-premise, and that may force your decision. The pricing models of the various solutions may affect your decision. It may be more cost effective to buy something than keep it for a few years. But if you've got something that's cost per head on a monthly basis and you're likely to scale up and down, it may be better to start in the cloud where you can add people as you go along, and if you have to slim down, you can reduce license costs again. So on to question 3, downtime, disasters. What does it really cost your business if you can't do your work? This is one of the areas that's constantly overlooked. Everyone thinks it's not going to happen to them. We see so many companies that aren't interested in spending money on business continuity and disaster recovery until something goes wrong. At the beginning of 2020, most businesses had a pretty big eye-opener onto what business continuity looks like. How many companies suddenly found that when they were told they had to stay at home, couldn't actually do their day-to-day work easily? Are you set up for power cuts? How are you going to respond to having all your data encrypted and not being able to access it? What do you do if your email system is down? There are lots of things that can affect day-to-day business. And one of the things that we like to do is not just look at what solution is going to solve a problem for you, but look at how you can cope if it stops working. What can you do to mitigate downtime and carry on working? There are all kinds of threats, from the physical, flood, fire, break-in, leaving your laptop on the train, accidentally deleting a document. How can you get all this back if you need it? How can you keep on working if something happens? Business continuity isn't always cheap, but the cost of not doing it when something happens can be huge. Are you trusting your cloud providers to do the backup for you? Are they actually doing it? Do they say they are? If your email is in Office 365 and you delete a mailbox, can you get it back? Microsoft may have copies of your data, but they don't back it up for your benefit. If they are backing anything up, it's for their own. And that may well mean that if you delete it, that's your fault. They're responsible for keeping the infrastructure running, but they're not responsible for the data you put in there. Do you have third-party backups? Is your email backed up somewhere else? If your staff send emails they shouldn't have done and delete it from their sent items, can you prove it came from them? Can you go back and have a look? Do you have an archive of every message that's sent? Can you delete that data that you shouldn't be keeping for a long time? If you're holding personally identifiable information, do you have retention policies, and can you delete them? Will they automatically get purged from your system when you don't have a reason for keeping them anymore? And are you keeping the things you do need to keep for long term? The threat landscape is constantly evolving, and the possibility of falling foul of a cyber attack, a denial of service attack, or even a social engineering attack is ever present. Often it's a case of not if, but when. If one of your accounts team receives an email from you asking them to transfer money to another organisation, would they spot it? If you have a case of ransomware, how far does that ransomware reach? If it affects the CEO, does he or she have access to every single document in the system, or do they only have access to what they need? Can you stop ransomware from affecting too many people by limiting permissions to only what people need? It's all very well having backup and disaster recovery solutions in place. Have you ever fire drilled your backup and disaster plan? Does it even work? How would you know? How do you know that just because you tested your backup 6 months ago that it's still working now? Looking at slide number 4, What software are you using? Is it correctly licensed? Does it do what it needs to do? There are lots of reasons needing to know this information. You might be paying for licenses you don't need. You might be exposing yourself to risks of fines if you're using software that's not licensed. Not only might you be looking at 4-figure fines or above for using unlicensed software, but there's also potentially a lot of time taken in doing investigations of whether software is on your network and being able to prove that you're not using unlicensed software if you're accused of doing so. Often, what's known as shadow IT creeps into businesses. This is where employees can't do what they want to do with the tools that you've given them. So they start using other tools, and they might end up sharing data they shouldn't be, putting it in places it's not supposed to be, and then you've lost control of it. So it's really important to have a robust system that can give you information on what everyone is doing and what they're doing with it, where your data's going, how it's being used. And a lot of that comes down to the software they're using. Is it licensed? Is it authorized? There are many great consumer bits of software out there that just aren't appropriate for business use. Perhaps the data is stored in countries that you're not allowed to store the data in. You could inadvertently be falling foul of data protection rules by using bits of software that you're not supposed to be using. If you receive a subject access request from somebody, you need to provide information on all of the channels where you might be storing their data from a business perspective. And that would include things that aren't necessarily authorized. If, for example, members of your team are using WhatsApp to communicate with clients, that falls under the data protection regulations, and you need to be able to look at those messages and find out if things have been said that don't represent what your company should be saying. For example, do you have policies that prevent your team from using bits of software that they're not supposed to be? If they are going to be using it, do you have a way of archiving and monitoring that communication? The sector you're in and the jobs your team doing may actually affect whether you need to do this. If you're in financial services, then you may have stricter regulations for the people interacting with clients versus people in the back office. But there's one of these things that you need to know and make sure you're covering off. So moving on to question 5. Is every part of your technology ecosystem as cyber secure as it needs to be? We talk a lot about layered security at claireLOGIC. This, generally speaking, is a bit like a multiple lines of defense. So, for example, we might have an email system, which first of all goes through a mail filtering and archiving system, and also business continuity perhaps rolled into that. Emails delivered to this system, processed, and then passed on to your main email server. And then you would be running some more checks on your email system to make sure that you pick up any malware, for example, or spam that your first system may have missed. Those emails are then delivered to your mailbox, and then you might have another layer of security running on your mailbox, part of your computer's antivirus system, for example. And then the actual antivirus system on the computer may well then process the links in those emails. It can be a great advantage to have different vendors involved along this chain. If you're unsure about your own cybersecurity status, the government's Cyber Essentials system is a really good place to start. It is exactly that, essentials. In the same way as you might have locks on your front door, locks on your back door, and locks on your windows, there are lots of different attack vectors that cyber threats may come from. And it's no point having a really, really strong defense in one direction if it's wide open somewhere else. And you need to remember your staff behavior in here. People are often the easiest way into any organization, whether that's just leaving a memory stick lying around for somebody to pick up and plug into a computer, or poor physical security. Can somebody just walk in during a team meeting, have a look around? Have a think about how you might achieve something you're not supposed to be doing. If there's anything you're worried about happening in your business, whether it's customer databases being leaked out, look at how easily you could send that to yourself, get it into your own email system. And then if you think you could do that easily, then you've probably got some work to do to try and tighten up your systems. Question 6. You may be doing the right things, but do you document it? If you're ever in the situation where you have a disciplinary procedure, Can you prove that they didn't follow the procedure? Or is it just your word against theirs about what you told them to do? The bigger the company grows and the more mature it is, you'll probably come across more and more places where you need good governance policies and procedures. All team members should be expected to abide by particular regulations and guidelines, but how do you know they actually are? How can you show them what they're supposed to be doing? How can they remind themselves what they're supposed to do at any particular point? You may have done something one way when you started doing it and handed it over, but a year or two later, is it still being done the same way? Or do you not know how things are being done in your own organisation? These kind of policies can be really useful as well, should you have any person who leaves, particularly if it's suddenly and there's no handover. How do you know stuff's not getting missed? If you've got one person in your organisation reporting use to a third-party company, maybe some software licensing or something, how do you know that that's still being covered properly? As far as governance goes, doing all the right things is one thing, being able to prove it is another entirely. Are there any regulators that control what your industry sector does? Do you need to be registered with them and meet their requirements? Do you need licenses to do certain things? How do you keep on top of all of this? And how do you easily prove that you're doing the right thing? Often once you've got one certification, you can actually use a lot of the framework around that to meet others. So sometimes the first one is actually the most difficult. Looking now at question 7, data security is a massive field. There's more than we could ever cover in one webinar. A really good starting point for looking after your data is the old CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Is the data you got confidential? Is it only visible to the people who need to see it? Is the integrity intact? Do you know that it hasn't been changed when it should have been? And don't forget to look at the availability. It's no good having the data if you can't get to it. For each piece of data you hold, you really need to consider these 3 things. Some of these principles can be sort of scaled down to things like knowing where all your data is. Can you retrieve it or delete it when you need to? And have you still got control of it? If somebody's been out and about on their phone, they've downloaded a message, and they then shouldn't have that message anymore, do you have the ability to wipe it off their phone? If you ever have a subject access request and you need to provide all references to a certain person, are you sure that you've got access to every single system that you have been using, whether officially or unofficially, and able to index and search and classify all that data to work out whether or not it needs to be used in the response to your subject access request? If you're then asked to delete it all, can you make sure it's taken away and it's no longer available to your team? There's quite a lot in data protection, and often it's not so easy. But what is easy to do is just ignore it, but that's not really an option these days. The Information Commission's office can impose really big fines, up to 4% of global turnover. If any of that data is in shadow IT, that's also your responsibility. If somebody's using WhatsApp to communicate with a client, you still need to manage that. You still need to be able to access those messages in there. And clearly that's not very easy to do unless you've got some strong policies, either saying that your staff aren't allowed to use WhatsApp and you try and police that, which is very difficult to do, or you have some kind of archiving solution for WhatsApp. That's just one example of a really popular tool that is used almost everywhere, but actually you need to be in control of that as well, which is not straightforward to do. Being data compliant is no longer purely the problem of finance companies. It's all of our problem, it's all our responsibility. And getting it right, while tricky, is much better long term than getting it wrong. Managing and maintaining data is the lifeblood of all businesses, whether you like it or not. We're not just talking about spreadsheets. It's email, text, WhatsApp, CRM records. Any data received and transferred on your website, and the list goes on. Your business is literally swimming in data sets. Do you know where they are? Do you know what they all are? Have you got a good index of everything that you use and all the places you might store data? Your data asset register can take a lot of time to build up, and you may find as you do it though that you can get rid of certain places you're storing data. You may question why you're using certain tools, and if you don't need them, just get rid of them. Having all this information in place means that if you ever do need to do something about it, you've got the information to hand and you're not suddenly creating a huge job for yourself that you can't get done in the timescales that need to be done. And finally, question 8. How do you plan, control and forecast technology costs? What's actually driving your decisions? Procurement isn't just about buying PCs. We've already talked about the cost of saving money by buying cheap. How do you manage your hardware replacement? Do you keep on going until a computer dies, or do you set an approximate age limit? And once you get there, take the opportunity to replace the computer in a controlled way. Having a controlled plan of when you replace systems means that the new systems will be fully tested and ready to go and let you migrate across them smoothly, whether that be a new computer or a new finance system or anything like that. It's really important to plan changes and replacements. If you leave it too late, you may find that you're having to put something in a bit of a hurry, often trying to get data out of a broken system and possibly not able to reconstruct or just losing information entirely. Technology is an investment. If you're not reaping benefits from spending on it, then you may not be spending in the right way. Underspending in IT will often have consequences, whether that be wasted staff time, as we've already spoken about, or losing data. One of the big costs of running IT properly is the time spent putting into managing and running systems. Often you can try and do this yourself, but then that's taking time away from you doing what you're supposed to be doing and what you're good at. Often it may initially look more expensive to outsource IT, but actually it can really save costs in the long run. You've got a team of people doing what they do day in, day out, and doing it really well if you pick the right provider. One of the big challenges is trying to know what you don't know. And if you don't know you're doing something wrong, or you don't know that you should be doing something that you aren't, how are you ever going to find time to learn to do that? One of the advantages we have of working with lots of different organisations is that we often know all the things that you should be doing, or a lot of the things that you should be doing, and can save you a huge amount of time by working with you to put the right things in place right from the start, rather than finding out when it's too late what you should have done. I hope you found this session useful. It may have answered some of your questions. It may have raised even more questions than you had when you started. But either way, do keep in touch with us. We'd love to work with you.